Speaker, I rise today to pursue a matter that I first raised in question. Well, I'd raised it earlier in question period since the month of September, but the specific matter for tonight's discussion relates to a question I put to the Prime Minister in question period on October 23rd. It relates to the Canada-China Investment Treaty. If I could, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take us back to where we were on October 23rd. We had tabled in this House with no ceremony, no warning, no briefing for parliamentarians, no lockup, on September 26th that the Canada-China Investment Treaty was quietly tabled before the House by the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. And under rules adopted by the current administration, we were given 21 sitting days, essentially to sit on it. There was no opportunity for debate. There was no opportunity for a vote. And as I had been anticipating, this treaty fairly closely models what had been done in other investor-state treaties, but is more egregious than the usual one in that we are allowing the People's Republic of China and its state-owned enterprises the ability to circumvent our courts, bypass our court system, go directly to an international arbitration, and challenge any law passed at the municipal level, provincial level, federal level, or even any decision of our courts, and challenge that it has cost them profits and therefore they demand an arbitration process, which is set out in the Canada-China Investment Treaty. Now, previous governments in this circumstance, and this is well documented in constitutional law texts, I refer anyone who's concerned with the foundational text by Professor Peter Hogg. Previous governments, even when treaties such as this one, does not require implementing legislation, which is the usual reason that treaties must be put to a vote in the House of Commons and the Senate. The usual practice of previous prime ministers was to bring such treaties to the House for a vote, whether they required implementing legislation or not. I refer briefly to the Kyoto Protocol. There was no need for implementing legislation, but it was brought to the House of Commons for a vote. Instead, and this has been lauded by representatives of the other side of this House, they adopted a practice called mandatory tabling of a treaty for 21 sitting days. Now, the timing on those sitting days, taking into account weekends and Thanksgiving and so on, was from September 26th to November 1st. And thereafter, at any point, the treaty can be ratified by a decision of Cabinet in order in Council. Now, the question I put to the Prime Minister was whether or not the constitutional aspects of this had been properly considered. That I'll quote my question, the arbitrations for damages against Canada for decisions at the provincial level do not demand explicit agreement with the provinces before the treaty is ratified. Now, in support of the case that I've made that this treaty violates constitutional rights of provinces, and in light of the Idle No More movement, let me also say of First Nations, I put into discussion this evening a letter to the Prime Minister of October 12th from the recognized international law expert in arbitration process, Gus Van Harten, Associate Professor at Osgoode Hall Law School. And what he wrote to the Prime Minister on this topic, and he had many topics, is this, quote, the treaty clearly impacts on provincial powers on natural resources, taxation, land and property rights, and other matters. It applies to provincial legislation, regulations, or court or tribunal decisions that affect Chinese-owned assets, with limited exceptions. It does not contain a NAFTA-style carve-out for provincial performance requirements or any carve-outs for provincial measures regarding the treaty's expropriation and fair and equitable treating provisions. Thus, there is a real possibility that over the lifespan of the treaty, Canada will face billion-dollar-plus awards due to provincial decisions that are not reviewable by Canadian courts. Mr. Speaker, this is clearly unacceptable. I await the Parliamentary Secretary's response.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, exporting Canada's world-class goods, services and expertise to new, fast-growing markets around the world is a key part of Canada's economic action plan for jobs, growth and long-term prosperity. Our government is delivering on this commitment. In fact, the Minister of International Trade is leading a trade mission to Ghana and Nigeria this week to do just that. Africa is one of the fastest-growing regions in the world. According to the International Monetary Fund, 5 of the world's 20 fastest-growing economies are in sub-Saharan Africa. Canadian companies are creating jobs and prosperity throughout Africa, and our government is creating new opportunities for Canadian exporters by opening new markets in this dynamic region. But promoting Canadian interests internationally also means creating the conditions for Canadian investors to invest with confidence. That's exactly what our government is doing with our foreign investment promotion and protection agreements. In fact, our government has concluded several such agreements with our partners in Africa, including with Tanzania, Benin, and Senegal. We've also concluded such an agreement with China, the world's second largest economy. This agreement will provide stronger protection for Canadians investing in China and create jobs and economic growth right here at home. This agreement establishes a clear set of rules under which investments are made and under which investment disputes are resolved. This treaty is about protecting the interests of Canadians. The FIPA also ensures that all investment disputes are resolved under international arbitration, ensuring that adjudications are independent. I would emphasize that ours is the first bilateral investment agreement that China has signed, which expressly includes language on transparency of dispute settlement proceedings. Let me be clear, it is Canada's long-standing policy that all dispute resolution should be open to the public and that the submissions made by the parties be available to the public. It's unfortunate, Mr. Speaker, that anti-trade activists have continued to spread such misinformation about this agreement. Thank you.
Full member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Well, I'm astonished by the Parliamentary Secretary's presentation. Let me just quickly clear up one thing. There is no misinformation in the following statement. The treaty itself does not require transparency. Only Canadian policy in place, and so it's a discretionary decision by either China or Canada to decide to make the proceedings transparent. There is no requirement for transparency in this agreement, and that's a departure from previous treaties. The Parliamentary Secretary for the Department of Justice has spoken of the benefits of an agreement with Senegal and Benin and Tanzania. Those countries are not likely to take Canada to court for billions of dollars because they simply don't represent the economic clout. It's unfortunate that Canadian mining companies may take them to court if they improve their environmental laws, but it's simply unacceptable. The People's Republic of China is invested in the right to sue us. This agreement does not open a single new market with China. They can still refuse Canadian investors' interest in their energy sector or their IT sector, but we are wide open to investments in the People's Republic of China, and if this agreement is ratified, we will be sued for billions of dollars if we improve our laws to protect the environment, health, or labor standards. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
As I've said, Mr. Speaker, this investment treaty will fundamentally help protect the interests of Canadian investors. I would also point out, and we so assert, that it is our government that brought greater transparency to the treaty review process. It was our Conservative government that in 2008 introduced a formal tabling policy that requires international treaties to be tabled in the House before their ratification or coming into force. In this case, the opposition parties simply chose not to debate it, despite having had several opportunities to do so. Mr. Speaker, the Canada-China FIPA is similar to the 24 other investment treaties Canada has signed with key trade and investment partners. This is yet another demonstration of how our government is creating jobs, growth, and long-term prosperity for hard-working Canadians and protecting their interests. Thank you.